and wondering at the countless religious beliefs of these nations. The Egyptians, the Syrians, King Herod. To revert to the Jews, I wonder, is it because, as you say, they identify future with past, that they have so many prophets?
Oh, the prophets, it's the sun which breeds them. Many of these are harmless. They preach religion. We let them go, but some of them preach rebellion because it is written. Altogether, literacy has had a disastrous effect in this country, and those we eliminate. Rome has taught us that although this may be indifferent theology, it is very good government.
Majesty, I've heard the word Messiah. What exactly is a Messiah?
Oh, even you have heard that awful word, Proculus.
Is he a prophet, or is he something even...
Well, Rome, even Rome, cannot influence men's dreams. And the Messiah is a bad dream disguised as a solution to every problem. It's a leveler of scores, a rewarder of righteousness, a scourge for the wrongdoer. It is the bringer of everlasting peace.
That is, I understand from what you have said, a Messiah is worse than a prophet from the Roman point of view.
Oh, from the Jewish viewpoint, too. Only you try telling that to the Jews. No, don't. It's much wiser not to consult them. Just when a Messiah appears, crush it underfoot like a young scorpion. Now you can tell great Augustus that he can rest in peace in Rome. There will be no Messiahs, true or false, in Palestine.
Your son will be teaching in the temple. Shall I take you to him?
No. I'll wait. I'll see him when it is time.
Blessed are the eyes that see what you see. For I tell you, many kings and prophets have desired to see what you see, and have not seen it. To hear what you hear, and have not heard it. I thank you, Father, for hiding these things from the learned and the wise, and revealing them to the innocent and the simple. For he who would be great among you must be your servant. He who would be the first must be your slave.
Just as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Come, O blessed of my Father, and inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me.
I was naked, and you clothed me. I was a prisoner, and you visited me. I was sick, and you came to me. You will ask, when did we do this for you? Whoever does this
to the least of my brethren. He does it to me.
In protocollo scripta archivi vocant veritas permanent. O lapide sacri testantur gloriam umbre et lucis narrant historiam mundi vanitas transit sed fides manet in aeternum sancta lux super nos fulget. Alleluia, amen, alleluia, amen.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's lecture. This is Emmanuel I. Smith, your host, and this is an introduction to my Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints Part 22 lecture, When a Church Becomes a Nation. I wanted to start off, ladies and gentlemen, by giving you some semblance as to what the 4th of July means to me personally, and from the perspective of a political dissident. First and foremost, if you talk to a person that does these signaling mechanisms that are present in clandestine gang stalking, ask them what they think of America, they'll probably give you some bullish answer or something real flat and dull like, well, it's the country I was born in, and I got friends and family here, so I love this country. All right, there won't be really any gusto behind the reasoning. And quite frankly, I think a lot of Americans are embarrassed to be Americans, quite frankly, particularly with the onset of these covert methods and mechanisms that are tantamount to domestic terrorism, biological warfare, and domestic thuggery perpetrated by the national intelligence and national security apparatus in this country, together with the U.S. Armed Services covert divisions operations. All right, these intelligence apparatuses and these national security agencies have for 75 years gotten with the U.S. Armed Forces and found ways to secretly, slyly, and unconstitutionally perpetrate horrible disruptions and subversions against the lives of American people, all in the name of data collection, all in the name of human behavior experimentation, and all in the name of Jesus Christ. That's this country's primary shield against international angst with its international and domestic thuggery. Just say you're a Christian. Just say in the name of Jesus. Just say we do all this with money that says in God we trust on it. Okay, this country has for at least 100 years used Christ, God, Jesus, the Holy Bible, the Holy Spirit, prophets, apostles, and similar religious ideas to perpetrate atrocities, not only against other Americans, but against people in other countries as well. And when I use the general term they, I'm talking about anyone who works in a governmental capacity that uses that governmental capacity to terrorize other people using Jesus as your shield. Okay, and that goes for companies as well. If you're a company that so-called is one that honors Christ, or even if you're a church that claims to honor Christ, and you sort of use your proximity to the Christian cultural tradition to perpetrate acts of thuggery against your fellow man, so that you can feel psychologically cleared of any wrongdoing, because after all, if it's done in the name of Christ, then it's done in the name of something notable, it's done in the name of something noble, it's done in the name of something eternal, it's done in the name of something all-powerful. Well, I'm here to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, anybody who perpetrates an act of thuggery against another person because they believe that Jesus Christ or God himself gave them the authority to do so, then that person is an ape. Plain and simple. Anyone who uses religious ideals or religious precepts or religious manuscripts and documents as justification to perpetrate acts of thuggery, criminality, or terror at home or abroad, that person is no better than a primate. And I don't care what denomination of Christianity you come from. I don't care what religion you come from. I don't care what your nationality is, your demographic, your ethnicity, your race. I don't care what your sociological beliefs are. I don't care what your political affiliation is. I don't care what your level of education is. I don't care what your familial status is. I don't care what your tax bracket is. If you use religion, whether or not you work for the government or a private corporation or a church, if you use religion as a pretext to commit atrocities against other people, you're a primate. Okay? And you have not ascended above the common sense that any monkey you see at the county zoo has. That is my introduction to this lecture, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in. It is Emmanuel Isaiah Smith, your host. Today's date is Saturday, July 4th, 2026. Happy 4th of July. Ladies and gentlemen, the time is 1:38 p.m. and I am in sunny Miami-Dade County, Florida. Thank you for viewing. Thank you for listening, ladies and gentlemen. The topic of today's lecture is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Part 22. When a church becomes a nation. And ladies and gentlemen, I usually do these lectures outdoors, so please adjust your volume accordingly, as there may be background noise coupled with the amplification of my voice ever so often. Ladies and gentlemen, for your benefit and mine. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for watching, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to get right down to the pressing matters at hand. We are experiencing a 4th of July. I'm not exactly sure if it's a celebration or not. I don't consider myself a part of the American mainstream in that regard. I have a lot of hang-ups about America. I have a lot about this country that bothers me, a lot about this country that disappoints me. Most of it stems from the plethora of CIA, U.S. Armed Services, FBI, and NSA activity that I've had the opportunity and the privilege to relay to you through a digital medium and online, not only for your listening pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, but for the furtherance of your education. Okay, I'm here to enlighten you. I'm here to inspire you. I'm here to give you the truth from a variety of perspectives: philosophical, political, theological, sociological, my own personal opinions. So many opinions, ladies and gentlemen, and so many angles and points of view goes into these lectures and discourses that I give you on a daily to semi-daily basis, not just to educate you, not just to learn myself, because mind you, I do a lot of research and I do a lot of historical analysis before I get into the main talking points and bring these videos to you live and direct. Okay, it's about more than that. It's about letting the American socio-political establishment know that there is a citizen out there that sees what's happening, that can quantify what's happening, that can compartmentalize what's happening, that can operationalize what's happening, that can put a face on something that is going on in this country that is a very stark reminder as to why the Homo sapien species, human beings, ladies and gentlemen, you and me, need constant government, constant governance, constant surveillance and monitoring, and constant accountability applied to our day-to-day behaviors, because without that, this country descends into utter chaos and anarchy. And ladies and gentlemen, gang stalking is the manifestation of that anarchy condensed down into a seemingly judicious, creative, and inclusive practice. But unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, the intelligence apparatus, the national security apparatus, and the covert arm of the U.S. Armed Forces are at it again, ladies and gentlemen. And they are looking to institute a form of martial law on all people by grouping them into sections, particularly sections of people groups of people, units of people, who answer to a similarly coded system of behavioral gestures, which includes verbal commands, vehicular maneuvers, physical gestures, and other symbols and cues that these people, countrywide, people that I call gang stalkers, use to communicate with one another, not in the interest of the common good, but of the interest of themselves, and to the detriment of other people. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it's obvious to me that the national security and intelligence apparatus of this country implemented this using a well-placed system of plainclothes government operatives across the country so as to educate the people through the undercover operative mechanism. Ladies and gentlemen, these systems, these signals, these commands, these gestures, these communication devices have been implemented by our national security and armed services in a way so as to enforce certain status quos upon society that had previously been broken by responsible politicians and civil rights activists alike, ladies and gentlemen. And what this system essentially does is it pits segment A of the population against segment B of the population, against segment C of the population, against segment D of the population. It's an endless cascade of antagonism that the American people have embraced through a silent communication protocol that is tantamount to a hostile takeover because, quite frankly, it's quiet. It's meant to be quiet. It's noticeable, but it's quiet. Their signaling mechanism is very clear and it's present. And it poses a danger to American democracy, plain and simple. This is what happens when you allow the national security element to socially engineer society's path forward. This is what happens when you let the armed services, particularly its covert operations divisions, go out into the world and implement such things so as to complicate the trajectory forward for society and control it, manipulate it. All of these things. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's what happens when you allow the national security apparatus of a country to become the judge, jury, and executioner. You get gang stalking campaigns. Now, that's my 4th of July diatribe. Thank you for listening. We're going to get over into the main talking points of today's lecture. We're talking about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, ladies and gentlemen. What happens when a church becomes a nation? All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's what we're talking about here today. And ultimately, this is going to have to go out to the spies, the undercover plainclothes operatives that the church has sent to me over the past year, the ones that apparently have some sort of a detail, some sort of a useful idiot detail that follows them from place to place, making sure that the church's operatives are safe and sound as they go about their pestering mission. But it's not difficult to see when their operatives are near or when their operatives are close, because the sort of the atmosphere of the scenario that I'm facing changes. It immediately turns into a spectacle when these things are being done for the church. What they're attempting to do is they're trying to document as much and as often as possible When I encounter knuckleheads, pesterers, gang stalkers, stooges, useful idiots, the whole nine, okay? The church wants its spies, its watchers, its constant surveillance monitors to be on me at all times, so when these events happen, their church's operatives, their plainclothes operatives, are front and center. Now, I'm not about to sit here and use the word spy too often. Okay, spies are typically government agents, but the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is already semi-governmental in nature. So to call their people spies is not really that far from the truth. But I would say plainclothes operatives is a better term for these persons that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is sending me. Now keep something in mind, ladies and gentlemen. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has operatives, employees, staff members, and senior level people in the U.S. Armed Services, okay? The Army, the Navy, the Air Force. So many different auxiliaries and components of the U.S. Armed Services, ladies and gentlemen. And they are constantly tapping into those resources so as to keep a closer eye on me, your host, Emmanuel I. Smith. Ladies and gentlemen, not for my well-being, okay? The church does not have operatives watching me 24/7 for my well-being, okay? Like me and probably about 6.9 billion other people in this world who are not members of the church couldn't care less what happens to me, your host. And that's from the top down. Okay, that's from the top down. And the reason that they couldn't care less what happens to a non-Mormon is because the church is a country, it's a nation, it's a separate societal unit than the global community is. It is totally separate. It is totally condensed. It is totally the opposite of any other societal mechanism that exists in the world. And in order to keep itself homogeneous, it oftentimes shuns the outside world is in terms of its importance, its overall importance. All right, I have this belief where I feel like every male member in the church, or almost every male member of the church, has this fantasy where the entire world gets wiped out, totally annihilated or done away with by a god or some deity. And the only people that are left on this earth are the 16 million members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That fantasy exists, ladies and gentlemen. Despite how deleterious that fantasy is to 7 billion living human beings, ladies and gentlemen. But look, I'm not here to condone or support or offer my undying show of support to humanity or condemn it. I think that human beings typically do the right thing if you incentivize doing the right thing. If you don't incentivize doing the right thing, human beings have a capacity to do the wrong thing. So if you are you saying, Smith, that you think human beings are naturally bad? Yes, that is what I'm saying. And things like laws, law and order, crime and punishment, okay, the oversight of governments. All right. Theology, all of these things work in tandem to force humanity to pursue a behavioral standard that is above their usual behavior standard, which is low. Okay, policies in companies, laws in government, okay, religious edicts and theology. All of these things force humankind to pursue a behavioral standard, indeed a standard of nobility that is beyond them. It forces people to go beyond their natural inclinations to achieve something greater, to become something greater. Religion plays a role in that. But what happens when a church becomes a nation, and not just a nation, but a usurper? All right, an entity that wants to do more than teach you the gospel, an entity that wants to manipulate your life and either enhance it or destroy it based on how you maneuver from day to day. A gang stalking is already a pack of useful idiot knuckleheads flinging signals at each other, trying to find a target to pester in exchange for the social credit that your fellow stalkers are going to give you. Kind of like a thanks for playing. A nice pat on the back from your fellow stalkers and saying, hey, thank you for reading that signal. It got you what you needed. Thanks for reading that signal. You almost ran that person over with a car. That's what I wanted. Thanks for taking that signal. You were able to fling diseases through the air at somebody I don't like. Or, hey, stalker, thanks for taking that signal. You know what you just did? You just got in the face of and nearly caused a person that I don't particularly care for to fall down a flight of stairs. Thank you. And that pat on the back is what stalkers want. That's what they crave. It's what they desire. It's why they get up every morning. They want to catch that signal that almost causes a catastrophe. Or even more, or what's more, maybe they'll ask for a signal and receive one that will actually cause a catastrophe to happen. That's every stalker's dream. Actually causing the catastrophe, not almost causing it, actually causing it. That makes them feel like real stalkers. Not just people taking signals all over the place, following targets around, but people who actually cause the catastrophe. They're not just following people around, pestering people. They want to actually cause a catastrophe. They want to be the cause of it. And there's just simply no denying that, ladies and gentlemen. And when it comes really right down to it, the only thing that could be any further from the truth is that the church is pro-global. It's not pro-global. It likes expanding. But just because you expand, it doesn't mean you love the areas that you expand through. The Roman Empire expanded. It expanded quite a bit. And by the year 476, it was the greatest empire the world had ever seen. But that doesn't mean that it loved or had anything positive or constructive to do with the countries that it invaded. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is no different Yeah, it expands across the globe, but it doesn't care about the countries that it's able to build in. It doesn't care about the citizens of the countries that it's allowed to build in. It doesn't care about the governments of the countries that it's allowed to build in. They're just stepping stones for sort of this worldwide conglomerate that the church is trying to build. And, you know, this worldwide conglomerate is apparently supposed to further the interests of the church and the church alone. All right? In the grand scheme of things, the church doesn't even care about the United States. Not in the grand scheme of things. The grand scheme of things, it sees the United States as a stepping stone to essentially the deification of the founder of the church, a guy by the name of Joseph Smith Jr., a guy that went to jail several times in his life, was a convict by the time he became the prophet of the Mormon church, and he was killed in prison. Having never even reached the age of 45. Okay, that's the man who built the church that I'm talking about right now, ladies and gentlemen, and we're going to get to the root of some things. All right, if the church has eyes on me, if the church has spies on me, I'm letting you know that I see them. I see them, and they appear to like spectacles. They appear to like to see crowds of people acting in an ape-like fashion. And when there's crowds of people doing that, especially around me, I get up and leave. Because it's obviously the whole lot of them took a signal to my location to start that ruckus. All right, the church spies like those kinds of situations because it gives them sort of a entertainment theater to watch a bunch of monkey-like, ape-like, and gorilla-like stalkers across the demographic spectrum the opportunity to pester people without recourse. And the Mormon churches, it's surveillance people, it's stalkers. They like those kinds of scenarios. They like them a lot. And the reason they like them is because it gives them live entertainment. It gives them the opportunity to witness verified instances of stalking in a fairly controlled medium. And these mechanisms, quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen, are pitiful to watch. They're pitiful to watch because they spell the end of the United States of America as a constitutional republic and as a democracy. And it spells the end of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as this benevolent church, which is what it wants you to believe. It is a worldwide espionage unit. It is centered in Salt Lake City, Utah, and it expanded outward. And it basically treats all countries that it is allowed into as conquered territory. All right? Just like the days of old, the ancient conquerors, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, okay, they would expand outward and acquire the land of other countries through force, through conquer, through a lot of things, coercion, intimidation. That's what these church security spies do. They are not friendly, church-going, Book of Mormon carrying, Bible reading people. Okay, the church's security system, its spies are a bunch of thugs. And that's how they conduct themselves too. So it's sort of like the spirit or the heart of the church being made manifest for the whole world to see. Okay? You're not seeing these missionaries on bicycles riding past you with a big smile offering you Book of Mormon lessons. What you see church operatives that probably have military connections infiltrating your personal space, making it clear to you and the spectators watching that your life and your trajectory through this world are of absolutely no value or concern to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints at all. At all, ladies and gentlemen. And quite frankly, I think it is it's an unfortunate series of events. It really is, ladies and gentlemen, for a church that's only 200 years old to have been granted access into almost 200 countries to preach the gospel of a man who was shot and killed in jail. Ladies and gentlemen, it kind of reminds me of some articles and news stories that I've come across. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been consulting AI. I've been consulting a lot of online. I've been cycling through a lot of online materials. And I've come across some tidbits of Mormon history that might shed some light into why the church is constantly looking to use its military undercover access or its military plainclothes operative access to start a ruckus and cause mischief in the lives of so many people. It's like, what does the church think it thinks it's doing with that? Particularly its church security system. What does it think it's doing with that? And this is a vast security system. I'm talking, it's a worldwide church security system. It's like, what are you guys thinking? Do you really think we're not going to find out? Do you think that we're not going to hold you accountable? Okay, what does it mean to be a church that's actually a nation? The church doesn't function as a church. It functions as an independent, multinational, territorial entity that really makes up its own laws. And it influences Congress. It influences a lot of people. And quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's a piss poor example of what happens. Actually, not a piss poor example of what happens, but a piss poor example of a multinational conglomerate trying to pose as a church. You can't pose as a church when you're an international espionage unit, and there's no telling how many confidential documents and top secret files from the governments of other countries that the church has stolen over the years. All right, it doesn't even have an interest in prosperity here in the United States. Only that which constitutes progress or expansion for the church, typically. Ladies and gentlemen, typically. And typically, ladies and gentlemen, also, you're not going to find any church in the world that is as structured or coordinated as the church. But you must understand, ladies and gentlemen, it is outside of the mainstream of the American way of thinking, the American way of life. Furthermore, it's outside of the mainstream of what the global community thinks is an appropriate, acceptable enterprise or institution. ladies and gentlemen. So ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, it comes down to this. What is the church's role in gang stalking, and why is it carrying this designation as a church or something similar when it is in fact an espionage unit and participates in real clumsy espionage? It boggles the mind. It just boggles the mind, ladies and gentlemen, and that's why we're here, ladies and gentlemen. That's why I'm here. I want to make sense of this for you, and I want to make this this clear. I want to make it as clear as possible, because the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has used undercover or plainclothes operatives that appear to have some sort of a U.S. Armed Services or U.S. military affiliation to cause mischief wherever they go. I mean, that's all it's about. It's about a bunch of people who, I guess, because they work every day, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's sort of a stress reliever for 9-to-5 workers or people that have a job 9 to 5 or something like that. A way to de-stress, a way to get ready for the work week ahead by taking your family to the local mall or your local shopping center or maybe a restaurant, looking for opportunities to fling or receive signals from somebody who wants to act like some kind of a big shot in front of their family and friends. All right, but that's just touching the surface, ladies and gentlemen. Beneath the surface, you see a deep hierarchy of persons that are very intertwined with the state, who can commit a whole plethora of crimes and disruptions and sabotage mechanisms against a person who is targeted. And the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has a hand in all of that. And I wouldn't be surprised, ladies and gentlemen, if this program, clandestine gang stalking, at its root, poses as a way for people to align themselves with like-minded people, other stalkers, so that they can feel safe, secure in their communities, churches, schools, homes, workplaces, when they're out and about. Give a signal, take a signal. That's how you know who the stalkers around you are. You do a signal, the person doesn't respond, he's likely not a stalker. Maybe another stalker points at somebody like me or another targeted individual and says, in their own language, hey, I don't want that guy around. Pester him, let's get rid of him. Some stalkers take it even further than that and enact violence or acts of violence or criminal actions that include violence against the stalkers, or against the targets. All right, there's a lot to consider here. There's a lot to ponder here. There's a lot to let simmer, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, if somebody who went to prison and got shot and killed in prison, if their brother or their cousin or their son came to you and said, hey, my dad or my uncle or my cousin or my grandfather was a wonderful man. He was a prophet. He was a person that had visions. He was a person that had a sophisticated worldview that was handed to him from on high. He was a man that heard directly from God. He was a man that heard directly from Christ. He was a man that ultimately bore the weight of the sins of mankind and his prophet is here. Okay, that's what members of the church will tell you, ladies and gentlemen. They'll say the prophet is here. You know, ladies and gentlemen, when a member of the church says to you, you know, we want you to come unto Christ and be baptized into this church, you say, well, where's the prophet? They'll say, the prophet is here. And at that point, you have to determine what it is they're talking about. You say, well, when do I get to meet this prophet? They'll say, the prophet is here. Say, well, you're sitting here telling me about a living prophet on the earth today. Can I shake the prophet's hand? They'll say, the prophet is here. You say, well, I mean, I'm reading your doctrines, I'm reading your books, I'm reading your scriptures, I'm reading your culture. I'm reading all these things. And all these things come down to one central precept. Okay, and this, imagine you having a conversation with a member of the church, right? And this is what you're saying. You're saying, you know, I want this to make sense. All right, you may say something to the effect of, I want to make a go of it. You know, I want to do the right thing, but you're going to have to tell me more about this guy that you all are calling a prophet. Where is the prophet? They'll say the prophet is here. And you will say, what does that mean, member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? What does that mean? And then they'll hold up a copy of the Book of Mormon and say the prophet is here. And then you'll say, well, you know, I'm just going to be honest with you. That just doesn't mean a whole lot to me. What are we talking about here? And what is it that causes the church to have such a prevalence in the United States and a prevalence around the world, but you never hear anything about the church? Why is such an omnipresent church so quiet? All right, why is the church never puts any of its actual news out? And how come the church is so silent on everything that happens there? It seems like everything that happens in the church, I mean, you guys keep it quiet. Why? Why is the church so quiet about everything? How come you don't want the world to know what's going on in your church? And they'll say to you, well, because of all the sinful influences in the world, we don't want to put ourselves in a position to where our church or its culture is corrupted. I don't want to put this, the heads of the church, the decision makers of this church, do not want to put it in a position where it is going to be endangered by the silliness of this world. And then you might ask further. You might say, well, what is it that you're exactly getting at with that? And they'll say, well, it's because the world is rooted in sin from primordial times. And the serpent in the garden of Adam and Eve that caused the whole world to sin has descended upon us in a very, very evil way. And it is looking to turn the hearts and minds of the people away from the Savior. you might say, well, that's all fine and good, but, you know, how does our trajectory, okay, my life, play into this thing, okay? Your church already has 16 million people. Let's say you say this back to them, ladies and gentlemen. All right, frame this in the context of a conversation between you, and let's say you're talking to two of their missionaries, right? And you say, well, where do I fall into this? Where does my life fall into this? They say, everything happens for a reason. We believe we ran into you for a reason. And what they might say too is, we don't believe that our Father in heaven would allow us to run into you the way we did unless he had a divine plan for your life. And you'll ask them back, well, what is God's divine plan? And they would say, read the Book of Mormon and be baptized in the name of the Savior. And then you might say, well, what's that mean for me? And they'll say back to you, a full and total conversion of the Spirit that will allow you to be a lifelong member of this church and enter into our temples. Do temple ordinances, be sealed to your loved ones forever and ever. And they'll say, well, you have nothing to lose. Be ye baptized in the name of the Savior Jesus Christ. You know, and then they'll give you some materials to read. But they won't give you the materials that I'm about to read. Because there are still some things that, as an organization, they are... they're sensitive about some things. And they don't want to talk about everything. They'll talk about some things. But they won't talk about everything. One of the things I'd like to talk to you about, ladies and gentlemen, that they may not talk to you about when you first meet whoever it is that invites you to church. It doesn't always have to be a missionary out on a mission. It's sometimes people who are actual members of the church already will invite people they know to church with the opportunity of potentially becoming a full member of the church. You know, they tell you some things, but they don't tell you everything, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here to tell you everything. Not only about gang stalking, not only about Operation COINTELPRO and Operation Hoodwink and Operation Chaos and Operation Sea Spray and Operation MK Ultra and all those human experimentation operations that the national security and intelligence and armed services agencies of this country have perpetrated against the American people. We're here to talk about the Mormon Church today, which is an auxiliary of all of these agencies that I just named. The church is an auxiliary of them and is in very close contact with them at all times. And the church does operations for them too. Spying operations, disruption operations, subversion operations against the American people. And they believe they're doing the Lord's work because they have the name Jesus on their incorporation documents. But what we're going to do, ladies and gentlemen, is we're getting ready to talk about the life of Sidney Rigdon. This was a gentleman that had quite a bit of influence in the church back in the mid-1800s. He was a guy that he took he sort of took this being on fire for Jesus thing to the next level. All right, in the American North Coast and in the American Midwest, and oftentimes in the American South in the 1800s, there was a very popular phrase they used to go around: I'm on fire for God, or I'm on fire for Jesus, or I'm on fire for the Holy Spirit. That just means that you're excited, you're inspired, and you are ready to proselytize other people into the church that you yourself are a part of, because you think that that is what the work of God, of the work of Christ is all about. But you hear that a lot. And this guy took it to the next level. I mean, this Sidney Rigdon guy, I mean, now he wasn't the founder of the church. The founder of the church is Joseph Smith Jr. But Sidney Rigdon was his right-hand man. And who a founder or a businessman or a pastor or whoever chooses as their right-hand man, their closest advisor, that tells you a lot about the person themselves. It gives you some idea as to the kind of person that leader thinks is useful. And Joseph Smith, the prophet of the Mormon Church, the founder of the church, Joseph Smith Jr. chose Sidney Rigdon as his right-hand man. Let's look at Joseph Smith's right-hand man so we can get some further insight as to the kind of man Joseph Smith himself was. So what I'm going to do, ladies and gentlemen, is I'm going to try to find a nice quiet spot. It may be difficult today because it's the 4th of July and there are a lot of people out and about, and some of them are here, actually doing something productive. And some are out here looking for signaling opportunities to cause mischief. Whenever and wherever they possibly can. And what I'm doing is I'm attempting to sort of add a layer of order to the chaos, and I'm looking for an opportunity to minimize the damage that I see being done, not only to the church, not only to the members, not only to the American way of life, but to the global community. All right, I think the church has a lot to prove. I think it has something to prove. I think it has an obligation to prove that it is not just simply an espionage unit that has violent, thuggish undercover operatives at its disposal. I think the church has to prove that. What do I like to do, ladies and gentlemen? I like to look a little bit into the church's past, because understanding the past of an institution gives you some semblance as to the present and the future of that institution. And I think not only with companies, but also governments. Okay, if you look into the history, if you look into the culture, if you look into so many different elements and aspects of that institution, of that company, of that government, then your trajectory through this world will be a lot more stable. It'll be a lot more sensible. It'll be a lot more in tune with what the ancient philosophers saw as the harmonious whole, or the common good. All right, it's not so much a situation where I'm saying, well, if it works for me, it works for you, or if it works for you, it's going to work for me. No, there are varied interests and ideas that people have. People have diverse mindsets about things, and if you live in a free society, a society where freedom of speech and freedom of thought are upheld, then people are going to exercise a variety of different personal beliefs about things. All right? Not only just about society or how it should be or how it ought to be, but ideas about corporate America, ideas about the American markets, ideas about capitalism, ideas about the political philosophy that America has, ideas about theology and religion, ideas about sociological matters. People have a variety of ideas on these things. Some of these ideas are considered mainstream, some are not. I never had a problem with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, ladies and gentlemen. I never had a problem. The only reason I do these videos on them is because I'm seeing their operatives. And seeing their operatives is not a pleasant thing. Why? Because they're raucous, they're rowdy, they're rambunctious, they're rude, they're dangerous, they're clumsy, they're antagonistic, they're hostile, they're violent. And those are the kinds of people that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has watching me. What gives? You asked me to do a Sunday morning talk about the love of Jesus Christ one day, and then 9 years later, I've got church security espionage units watching my every move. Watching my every move indeed. It is a unfathomable state of affairs, ladies and gentlemen, an unfathomable state of affairs. I will be back shortly. I am back, ladies and gentlemen. I needed to take a quick break. So what we're going to do now is we're going to come to a point in time in the discussion where we're going to talk about historical influences in the holistic trajectory of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints' movements through time and space. We're going to talk about the nature of the business moves that Joseph Smith Jr. made. Joseph Smith Jr. being the founder and the first prophet of the church. We're going to look at some of the business moves he made. We're going to look at some of the political moves that he made. We're going to look at some of the unusual things that he did and some of the unusual decisions that he made. In my mind, the first unusual decision that he made was giving all that power to Sidney Rigdon. Sidney Rigdon was born in 1793, and he lived until 1876. And he was a prominent early leader in the Latter-day Saint movement. And I'll just let you know, ladies and gentlemen, right offhand, as I move about, as I do this lecture, as I do my analysis, we're going to run into some stalkers while I'm talking. Mind you, ladies and gentlemen, if you're a targeted individual, you're a targeted individual indeed. This is not something that you experience ever so often. It's not something that you experience from time to time. And it's not something that you experience just when you're in this place or that place. You experience it 24 hours a day, 7, okay, in a world that has no end. Ladies and gentlemen, so it doesn't matter where you are, you're going to run into stalkers because this program is 24 hours a day, and there are 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, at least one person tailing you, following you, signaling to you, all right, your whereabouts, your location, what you're doing, what you're wearing, your characteristics to other stalkers. And it creates kind of a group activity situation where one person's participating can easily turn into 100 or 1,000 people participating, depending on how many stalkers are in a given area. Okay, because they all talk the same language, because they all use the same communicative devices, because they all use the same sort of social engineering protocols, they all have similar ways of communicating, and they all understand the signals that they use to one another to point out targeted individuals. All right, this has been figured out. I have figured you out. And I'm doing today's lecture in a shopping mall, ladies and gentlemen, because it's just simply too hot to do the lecture outdoors. It's north of 92 degrees out there. I can't do a lecture out there. It's scorching. So I'm in the mall, ladies and gentlemen, doing my lecture, and there are a lot of people here, a lot of synchronization, a lot of signals being thrown, a lot of signals being received, a lot of synchronized obstruction of movement, a lot of synchronized space crowding, a lot of stalkers flinging diseases and airborne bacteria through the air. A lot of these things carrying on today, ladies and gentlemen, inside of this mall. A lot of these mechanisms, a lot of these disruption mechanisms, they just simply it's all street theater. It's amusement. It's a lot of things, ladies and gentlemen, for the stalkers themselves. But what we need to do, ladies and gentlemen, is because if we're going to find out or figure out or understand why members of what you might refer to as an international church participate in gang stalking, you have to look at the history. You got to look at the history, and everything that happens after that will make sense. Okay? So Sidney Rigdon, 1793-1876, was a prominent early leader in Latter-day Saint movement and a central figure in its history in the 1830s and 40s. He was born in Pennsylvania. Rigdon was a successful and charismatic preacher who had been involved with the Baptist movement. And as I continue, I just want to stop again. We're going to run into some useful idiots while we're doing this lecture. I'm just letting you know. They're signaling people to me from all different directions now. I can't record it all of the time because I simply don't have the storage capacity. So I have to put my experiences into words for you and enter them online, okay? I've been working on this project for 9 years. I simply don't have 9 years worth of footage to show you. But as soon as my storage capacity increases and I'm able to store more videos and content online, then I'll likely start showing you more and more in person, live and in effect, and on video, what a lot of this stalking looks like. All right, so just keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, we will run into some useful idiots. Please try and to ignore any background noise that sounds derived or disruptive. So, this gentleman, Sidney Rigdon, was born in 1793. He started off his life in the Baptist movement. He was deeply committed to the restorationist goal of returning the church to primitive practices. He converted to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints after having been introduced to the Book of Mormon by missionaries, including his former parishioner Parley Pratt. Following his conversion to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Rigdon became one of Joseph Smith's most important associates. When the first presidency was organized in the year 1832, Rigdon was called as a counselor to Joseph Smith. Okay, that shows you right there how lock, stock, and barrel a follower of Joseph Smith this man was. He was a scribe for Smith's revision of the Bible. He was a key contributor to the church's early theological movement. He and Smith recorded a vision together in the year 1832, and it was about something called the 3 degrees of glory, which are basically 3 levels of glory that a person can reach based on their participation in LDS theological concepts, etc., etc. And quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen, he was a spokesman for the church. Sidney Rigdon, a spokesman. At 35 years old, 1832 was the year, he was a spokesman for the church. He was very involved with the early Mormon church. There in Kirtland, Ohio. At the time, the church was headquartered and centered in Kirtland, Ohio, which is about 30 minutes north of Cleveland, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe 45 minutes north of Cleveland, Ohio. The church was centered there in Kirtland, Ohio for a while. And for those of you that know Northeast Ohio really well, Kirtland is just north of the city of Mentor, Ohio. So this man was a spokesman. And in 1838, this man, he just totally became a real liability for the church. I mean, just 6 years after having been made a spokesperson and the right-hand man of Joseph Smith Jr., the founder of the church, he started becoming quite a bit of a liability to the church. He moved to Missouri to attend to the church's interests there. And he just basically got into scuffle after scuffle after scuffle after scuffle after scuffle with the townspeople in Missouri. Okay? And as I can promise you, if you are of the mindset that you're going to take your church into another state, you have to make sure that when your church sort of branches out into new states, that you treat the townspeople there with respect and generosity. But Sidney Rigdon was different. He, I guess, was full of himself. I'm the spokesman of Joseph Smith, and I'm the second in command of the Mormon church. And he went over to Missouri and raised hell. He caused a continual ruckus in Missouri. And it got to the point where the Missourians, they started hating the church without even knowing much about it, just because of how ignorant this Sidney Rigdon guy was acting. And the way he talked about the gospel, he liked to condemn people who were non-Mormons, and he treated outsiders as if they were pieces of trash. So after the death of Joseph Smith in 1844, there was a succession crisis regarding who would take over. Rigdon returned from Pennsylvania to Nauvoo, Illinois, and asserted his right to lead the church as its guardian. At the general meeting held on August 8, 1844, the majority of church members voted to sustain the quorum of the 12 apostles, led by Brigham Young, rather than following Rigdon. Shortly after the vote, Rigdon became bitter. He walked away from the church. He started bad-mouthing the church, and the church excommunicated him. That's a permanent ban from the church. After that, Rigdon moved to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and started his own religious movement, still claiming to be the leader of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And he basically remained in obscurity for the rest of his life. Now, it's a situation where you can't look at historical narratives like this and dismiss their importance in the grand scheme of things. And the reason you can't dismiss their importance is because when it comes right down to it, and ultimately, it's the whole reason that you have the movement in the first place. You wouldn't have the movement in the first place if it wasn't for these types of occurrences. I mean, the ups, the downs, all that. It all factors in to why the church is the way it is and why it's had the history that it's had. And there were other curious instances involving this guy that we'll talk about later. But this guy was the right-hand man of the owner, the prophet, the president, the chief executive of the early church. This man was his right-hand man. And his right-hand man wound up getting banned from the church and excommunicated. It is a really bizarre series of events. All right, now we're going to talk about Liberty Jail. From December 1st, 1838 to April 6th, 1839, Liberty Jail served as the site of a profound and traumatic period for Joseph Smith and several other leaders of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, including his brother Hiram, Sidney Rigdon, his right-hand man that we just spoke about, Lyman Wright, Caleb Baldwin, and Alexander McCrae. Following the surrender of church leaders at the end of the 1838 Mormon War, they were accused of the treason against the state of Missouri. They were held in the Clay County Jail in Liberty, Missouri, while awaiting trial. The facility was considered escape-proof and featuring walls 4 feet thick, with limestone and a lot of other materials welded into the brick so that it was impossible to destroy. And the experience is widely considered by members of the church and those who document this period in Smith's life and in the lives of his right-hand men. When they all got thrown into Liberty Jail following the 1838 Mormon War, they kind of described it as a period of extreme hardship. And one that changed the worldview of these men dramatically. I mean, this experience in this prison was so horrible that these men wrote about it in journals, talking about how horrible this jail experience was. Now, this wasn't the first time Joseph Smith or any of his advisors. This wasn't the first time any of them had been to jail. A few of them had been to jail several times throughout their life for various acts of mischief. But there was something different about Liberty Jail, ladies and gentlemen. All right, it was 14 by 14 feet. It was like being in an ice box. Okay, with respect to how cramped it was. And it was a really awful experience for these men. They're in Liberty, Missouri, in the worst prison ever built in Liberty, Missouri. There, the prophet of the Mormon Church was Joseph Smith Jr. and his right-hand man. They were all sitting in this horrible, corroded jail in the year 1838 in Liberty, Missouri. It was Joseph Smith, Hiram Smith, Sidney Rigdon, Lyman Wright, Caleb Baldwin, Alexander McCrae, all of them sitting in this horrible jail cell in the middle of Liberty, Missouri in the year 1838, following the end of the Mormon War, which was basically a civil war between Missourians and the Mormon Church. They hated each other. And the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints' failure to assimilate into Missourian culture was a huge part of that. And there were arguments over slavery. The Missourians were pro-slavery, the Mormons were anti-slavery, but the Mormons, despite being anti-slavery, they didn't want blacks in the church. They said, we don't think blacks should be slaves, but just don't send them to our church when you free them. Okay, now we believe that blacks are God's children and they deserve freedom and not to be slaves, but when you free those black slaves, all right, when you free those African Negroes, don't send them to our church, because we ain't going to let them in. And that was kind of the Mormons' attitude, and people were saying, that's kind of a bizarre attitude, and what do they really think they're accomplishing with that? And ultimately, I mean, it's kind of like dangling a carrot over a horse's head, and expecting something positive or good to come out of that. Yeah, the horse is walking. Yeah, you're getting from point A to point B if you're riding the horse. But ultimately, what's it do? It doesn't train the horse. If you take the carrot away, the horse sits down. That's not the kind of horse you want if you're a horse rider. If you're a person that rides a horse, you want the horse well trained to where you don't have to dangle a carrot in front of its face in order to make it run. You want a horse that does that on its own. The problem with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was it was always dangling a carrot in front of the face of the proverbial horse that it was riding. Okay, what was the horse? It's basically the membership. The membership is the horse. The people that pay tithe to the church are the horse. Okay, it's new converts, and it's the people that grace the pews every Sunday. That's the horse. The riders are the leaders of the church, and they ride that congregation like a horse, constantly dangling trinkets and gifts and various incentives over the heads of the members to make them act right and to make them appreciate the church more. And the church is constantly so-called preparing the members for eternity and offering these prophecies and this temple and that temple and this service and that service. And this spiritual gift and that spiritual gift and this blessing and that blessing and this ability to advance or see upward movement, or that ability to advance and see upward movement, or being able to make friends and cultivate relationships with this person or that person or these persons or those people. And there's constantly an incentive to do this or that dangling over the heads of the members of the church. And ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, all it leads to is chaos. You got 16 million people that think they're more valued than they really are. Okay, and these types of deceptive practices lead people sometimes to do heretical things. I mean, you have super zealots in the church right now, okay, that would take up arms and literally go to war with the American people if the American people said, wait, you know what? We don't think this church is good for society. We don't think an espionage unit is good for society. Let's talk to Congress and see if we can get the church disincorporated. You have ultra zealots in the church that will attempt to that would attempt to put you down with arms. All right, yeah, the church is a standing army. That's why it asks a lot of its members to join the armed forces and the armed services, so it can have what resembles a standing army. That's a deterrent against anything that could possibly threaten the church's existence. And yeah, the church would pick up arms and go right to war with the U.S. federal government if the U.S. federal government tried to shut it down, period. And ladies and gentlemen, these stories, I mean, particularly in the early church, I mean, these stories, they're stark in what they present. They're stark in their narrative. They're stark in their ability to make you wonder just what was the early Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints made of, and what were its leaders about. So far, all I can see is money grubbing, philandering, anti-government, hedonists is what it looks like. And you got persons in the church today that say, nope, the opposite. The founder of our church was called by God, and because he was called by God, that makes everything he says true. And if everything he says is true, and I follow his doctrine, then that means everything I say is true as well. Right? There are members of the church that think like that, ladies and gentlemen. And think of it, that church is in 200 countries. So, I mean, they were basically thrown into a dungeon. It was dirty. They didn't feed them much. It was inescapable. And it took a psychological toll on them. And sections 121, 122, and 123 of the Doctrine and Covenants, which is one of the holy books of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, were based upon the feelings of Joseph Smith Jr. while he was sitting there rotting in Liberty Jail. Exactly. So Sidney Rigdon was released first. And the rest apparently escaped. And the reason they were allowed to escape was because this scenario was taking a toll on Missourians. So they fled to Illinois, and They set the church back up in the area known as Nauvoo, and that's when the all those horrible scenarios involving Joseph Smith Jr. took place, and he vandalized the printing press because this printing press wrote stuff about him. That he didn't particularly care for, and as a result, he hired some people to vandalize the printing press. Which eventually caused him to be thrown in jail as the orchestrator of that. I think he was charged with domestic terrorism for vandalizing that printing press. And when he was thrown in jail, a bunch of guys from the town that didn't like his philandering, and they didn't like the fact that he was giving away the secrets of the Freemasons in temple ceremonies, what did they do? They put on black paint on their face, walked into the jail with rifles, and they shot and killed Smith. Joseph Smith Jr., the founder of the Mormon Church, him and his brother. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, what do you hear when we talk about this man, when we talk about his history? What do you hear? You see, what do you hear? Okay, I'll tell you what I hear. I hear the future of gang stalking talking back to me. That's what I hear. Okay, I hear a church that calls itself Christ, okay, that has an aberrated history, that wants to try and cleanse itself with the blood of the American people. As the American people continue to dive down into their primate nature, okay, and attempt to make sense of the world around them, not by experience or by understanding the world around them through research, development, and the cultivating of one's mind, body, and spirit. Rather, they would just rather ask somebody else, you know, what does the prophet of the church say? The current prophet. What does the current prophet of the church say? The current president of the church, what's he say? What's the bishop say? What's the stake president say? What do they say? All right, that's what they'll say back to you. What do other people say about it? It's not what do I think about it based on my research and experience. They'll say, what do other people think? Maybe we can follow their lead. So ultimately, that's what happens. They follow someone else's lead, and someone else doesn't know what they're talking about, and the entire church follows that person right into the realm of disobedience and ignorance. All right, it boggles the mind, ladies and gentlemen. But I'm going to leave this lecture here. I'm going to get this video rendered and posted. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.